Romans chapter 12 is packed and dense. Let's look at the beginning. Paul tells us to be living sacrifices. I'm sure you've heard that phrase a million times by now in your life, a living sacrifice. But the paradox of that phrase may be lost upon us now because we've heard it so many times. A sacrifice is an animal that you kill and then burn on the altar. Typically, you take a vulnerable, a valuable animal, an unblemished animal, and then by killing it and burning it on an altar and sacrificing it, you're giving something precious, something valuable to God. Or to put it really bluntly, sacrifices are dead animals. A living sacrifice makes no sense, and we are the living sacrifice. What this means is you're dead, but you're not dead. You're dead to yourself, but alive in Christ. Or to put it this way, you don't belong to yourself anymore. Your life has been given up, given over to God. Just as a lamb has been killed and burned on the altar, in a sense, we're kind of dead to ourselves, but we're not dead to God. We don't belong to ourselves anymore. The lamb that's been killed and sacrificed no longer belongs to the person who owned the lamb, because the person who owned the lamb said, I'm giving something that's very expensive and valuable and giving it to God for him to have. And by burning it and killing it, I'm giving it over to God. And that's us. We've been burned and killed and given over to God. But we're still alive, of course, which is the weird paradox. You forever belong to God, and you've relinquished ownership over your own life. So let's think about the rest of the chapter, and it spells out the rest of the implications of what it means to be a living sacrifice. Paul tells us, quote, do not think of yourself more highly than you ought, end quote. We all naturally tend to think of ourselves first. I do. We tend to see the world from our own perspectives. We are very painfully aware of every instance when we've been offended. Someone's crossed us, offended our honor, speaking ill of us, stepped on our rights. But at the same time, we're often blind or tone deaf to the way that we've offended others. We are offended all the time, and we're clueless to the ways in which we offend those around us. Or in our jobs, we work to advance ourselves. Maybe we have to. Our jobs demand self-advocacy. We have to tell our coworkers and our superiors all the time in a tactful way, all the great things we've done and all the ways we've made money for the company or advanced things or done good things. I mean, it doesn't mean that we step on other people on the way up or we sabotage your coworkers. Maybe you do. I don't think you do, but it doesn't mean we have to go that far. But even if you don't go evil that way, nonetheless, we are encouraged by our work, by our society, to think highly of ourselves. We need to look out for ourselves. We need to look out for our family, our friends, and our allies. Otherwise, we make ourselves vulnerable and we don't advance. We have to look out for ourselves, our own interests. That's because, we think highly of ourselves. Another thing, in America, we're obsessed with rights, as in I have my personal rights. Rights are those things that belong to you, your freedom. We're allowed to do whatever you want to do, and no one can stop us. Rights are those things that are mine, and no one's allowed to take it from me. All this might lead us to think of ourselves as more highly than we ought, as Paul says. And again, I think we're already always naturally inclined to become self-absorbed, to be self-centered, to be driven to advance our own agenda. And our culture and our world only encourages our own worst tendencies by rewarding us for being self-centered and self-absorbed and advancing ourselves. It seems like those who don't advance themselves or don't look out for themselves get left behind. And those who are egotistical and push and push and push and always think about themselves, they're the ones who get rewarded. We have eyes. We see what's going on. And I think we learn from our world. It's hard not to. But Paul says, no, don't do that. God says you're not allowed to live that way. You're Christians. You have a new identity. Paul goes on. He commands us to, quote, be devoted to one another in love. Honor one another above yourselves, end quote. In other words, he's telling us to put other people above ourselves. He's saying, gut yourself of your own rights. Eviscerate yourself of your own right or desire to advance yourself. Your own self-importance. Make a priority of yourself. Make it, and others are not a priority. It gets worse. Paul says, don't take revenge. Even if you have a right to revenge, don't take revenge. He goes on to say, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If your enemy is thirsty, give him a drink. Wow, it keeps getting worse. We always have to put others above ourselves. And now he says, put your enemy above yourself. What's Paul asking us to do? Some of us on Friday nights are reading Keller's book, Forgive. In our recent discussion, I was thinking that I resist forgiving because I think it makes me weak, or it makes me look weak, or literally weak. I think I fear that if I'll be taken advantage of if I keep forgiving over and over again. And what if I get a reputation for the guy that keeps forgiving over and over again? I'm afraid that I'm going to be weak and people can take advantage of me. And I wonder if in the back of my mind, I think to not forgive or to withhold forgiveness makes me strong. And if I punish those who cross me, others will fear me and I'll be safe. And then no one will take advantage of me because this is a cruel world full of vicious people. And if I keep forgiving, I'll be a chump. And I wonder if I fear being a chump. But Paul here is telling us to honor others above ourselves. Well, how do you do that? Well, I think it actually goes back to the very beginning of the chapter. You are a living sacrifice. You belong to God. You don't belong to yourself anymore. And so we can't spend our lives looking out for our own self-interest because we belong to God. God looks out for us. And we've given up the right to look out for our self-interest and put ourselves first.